Claude Monet, one of the most influential figures in the history of art, was born on November 14, 1840, in Paris, France. However, his family moved to Le Havre, a port city in Normandy, when he was just a young child. His early years in Le Havre were marked by both his family's modest means and the formative experiences that would later shape his artistic vision. Monet's initial exposure to the arts was relatively early, thanks to his mother, who was an amateur singer and an important figure in his childhood. However, it was his father, a grocer, who provided the primary influence on Monet's early life, steering him toward a career in business. Despite this push from his father, Monet's love for art would eventually overpower the commercial path his father envisioned for him. Growing up in Le Havre, Monet was exposed to the vibrant life of a bustling port city, with its busy harbors and dramatic skies. These early experiences would have a profound impact on Monet's later works, where the interplay of light, atmosphere, and water became central themes in his art. Monet's formal education began with drawing lessons at a young age, where he studied under local artist Jacques-François Ochet. Although his first drawings were caricatures, they exhibited an unusual sensitivity to light and form, elements that would later define his mature style. At the age of 11, Monet enrolled at the Le Havre Secondary School of the Arts. His early works, particularly his sketches of coastal landscapes and urban scenes, began to demonstrate his affinity for capturing the fleeting effects of light. However, despite the nurturing environment of Le Havre's art community, Monet's father, who had hoped for his son to take over the family grocery business, did not fully support his artistic ambitions. This conflict between father and son would lead to a significant turning point in Monet's life, pushing him toward an independent path. In 1856, Monet's first breakthrough came when he sold a series of caricatures, which were influenced by the artistic caricature trends popular in Paris at the time. His skill in caricature drawing eventually led him to Paris, where he hoped to gain further artistic training. Monet's move to Paris in the early 1860s marked a significant chapter in his development as an artist. He entered the prestigious studio of Charles Glaire, where he met other young artists who would become central to the formation of the Impressionist movement, including Pierre-Auguste Renoir, Frédéric Bazille, and Alfred Sisley. It was in this studio that Monet was first exposed to a new artistic language, one that focused on the direct observation of nature, rather than the traditional methods of academic painting that dominated the art scene in Paris. During his time in Paris, Monet encountered the revolutionary ideas of the Barbizon School, a group of painters who rejected the conventions of formal studio practice in favor of painting directly from nature. This radical departure from academic traditions would profoundly shape Monet's evolving style. Although his work was often critiqued for its unfinished, spontaneous nature, Monet found a deep affinity with this new approach, and he began to experiment with capturing the effects of light and color in the natural world. His brushstrokes became looser and more expressive, foreshadowing the techniques that would define his later work. Despite his artistic development, Monet struggled with financial instability during his early years in Paris. He faced constant challenges in gaining recognition, and his work was frequently rejected by the official art institutions. It was during this period that Monet became acquainted with fellow artists who would later share his passion for breaking away from conventional art norms. Yet, Even as he was met with rejection and hardship, Monet's resolve only strengthened. His vision of capturing nature's fleeting moments persisted, and he began to focus on painting in plein air or outdoors, a practice that would become one of his trademarks. Monet's life during the 1860s was punctuated by personal struggles. In 1867, he became deeply affected by the death of his beloved mother, a loss that would profoundly shape his emotional and artistic life. He also faced financial pressures as he continued to pursue an art career with little commercial success. During these years, Monet's paintings became darker and more introspective, reflecting both his grief and his evolving artistic approach. Yet, even amid personal and financial setbacks, Monet's commitment to capturing the transient beauty of nature remained undiminished. In 1866, Monet's iconic Workwoman in the Green Dress was completed, a piece that marked a departure from his earlier efforts. The figure of his model, Camille Dancieux, whom Monet would later marry, is portrayed in a lush green dress against a background of vibrant colors. This work exemplified Monet's move toward a more modern approach to portraiture, focusing not on the detail of the figure itself, but rather on the interplay of color and light. This experiment in merging color with form would later become one of Monet's signature techniques. By the late 1860s, Monet had begun to take the first steps toward revolutionizing the way we view the world. His works from this period, including The Woman in the Garden and Bordighera, offered early glimpses into his distinctive style. These paintings, though not yet fully developed in the way that would define his later masterpieces, were already characterized by a keen sensitivity to light and atmospheric effects. They marked the beginning of Monet's lifelong fascination with how light interacted with the environment, a theme that would dominate his later body of work. Claude Monet's move to Paris in the early 1860s marked a pivotal moment in his artistic journey, leaving behind the tranquil shores of Le Havre, where he had spent his formative years. Monet ventured into the bustling art world of Paris, a city brimming with innovation and conflicting traditions. Paris, during this time, was at the heart of the cultural revolution in the arts, where traditional academic styles were beginning to be challenged by new, experimental approaches. Monet's arrival in Paris coincided with a period of profound change, not just in the arts, but also in politics, society, and the very fabric of French identity. Upon arriving in Paris, Monet immersed himself in the city's vibrant artistic scene, seeking to learn and grow among its most progressive minds. He initially enrolled in the prestigious studio of Charles Glaire, where he studied alongside other young artists who would later become key figures in the Impressionist movement, including Pierre-Auguste Renoir, Frédéric Bazille, and Alfred Sisley. This exposure to a circle of like-minded individuals, each with their own unique approach to art, was crucial to Monet's development. Through these relationships, Monet was introduced to radical new ideas about painting, ideas that rejected the tight academic rules of traditional French art. The influence of the Barbizon School, a group of landscape painters who worked outdoors, directly impacted Monet's early work in Paris. Monet adopted the outdoor painting method, or plein air painting, which allowed him to capture the fleeting qualities of nature, especially the effects of light and weather. Unlike the studio-bound techniques of the Academy, this approach required artists to work quickly directly engaging with the natural world around them. This marked the beginning of Monet's lifelong obsession with light and its ever-changing qualities, a central theme that would permeate much of his later work. However, it wasn't just the style of the Barbizon artists that influenced Monet. It was also their willingness to challenge the status quo. During this period, the Salon, the official art exhibition in Paris, remained the ultimate avenue for an artist's success. Gaining acceptance into the Salon was crucial for any aspiring artist, as it provided a means of recognition, financial stability, and access to elite patronage. Monet, however, did not submit to the Salon's rigid rules, which dictated subject matter, composition, and technique. His works, with their bold use of color and loose brushwork, were not easily accepted by critics, who regarded them as unfinished or lacking in detail. Monet's rejection from the Salon in 1866 and 1867 highlighted his outsider status in the French art world, but it also marked the beginning of his rebellion against academic conventions. Despite these early setbacks, Monet continued to refine his style. During the mid-1860s, Monet began creating works that were influenced by the urban environment of Paris. One notable piece from this time is the Boulevard Montmartre on a Winter Morning, 1868, which captures the lively energy of the Parisian streets. Here, Monet applied his developing technique of capturing light and atmosphere, though still tethered to the city's structures and figures. This work was a step forward in his search for a new artistic language, one that would eventually become more abstract and less reliant on representational accuracy. One of Monet's key breakthroughs during this period was his focus on the effects of light on the landscape. He began to realize that light wasn't just something to be depicted realistically, but was instead an element that could shape the entire composition of a painting. Monet's interest in the transient qualities of light began to push him beyond traditional landscape painting and into new realms of visual expression. He often worked outdoors, capturing scenes of gardens, rivers, and fields at different times of day and in varying weather conditions. These studies not only reflected his artistic vision, but also his desire to understand the impermanence of nature itself. Monet's growing frustration with the Salon and its rejection of his work led him to pursue alternative venues for displaying his art. In 1874, Monet, along with a group of other like-minded artists, organized an independent exhibition that would become a landmark event in the history of art. This first Impressionist exhibition, though initially met with ridicule and harsh criticism, would ultimately pave the way for a complete transformation in the art world. The name Impressionism, coined by a critic who scorned Monet's painting impression, Sunrise, 1872, was initially intended as an insult, suggesting that the painting lacked detail and appeared unfinished. However, Monet embraced the term, and it soon became synonymous with his revolutionary approach to art. The impression, Sunrise painting itself, marked a turning point in Monet's career. The loose brushwork, the emphasis on color over form, and the absence of fine detail challenged the viewer's perception of what art could be. Monet's depiction of the harbor at Le Havre in the early morning mist was not concerned with literal representation. Instead, it sought to convey an impression of the scene, the fleeting atmosphere, the interplay of light, and the colors in the sky and water. In many ways, This painting became the manifesto of the new movement that would radically alter the direction of modern art. As the 1870s progressed, Monet's work continued to evolve. His focus on capturing the moment, rather than producing a finished, detailed representation, began to garner attention from a growing group of collectors and critics. Though Monet was still often criticized for his bold departure from traditional art forms, he found solace in the fact that his fellow artists, including Renoir, Degas, and Pissarro, shared his vision. The group's collaborative spirit helped to foster an environment in which the boundaries of art could be pushed further, and the idea of painting as a means of capturing fleeting moments gained traction. By the end of the 1870s, Monet had cemented his place as one of the central figures of the Impressionist movement. His move toward creating large-scale series of paintings, such as his Haystacks and Rouen Cathedral series, allowed him to explore the effects of light and atmosphere in a more systematic way. These works, which depicted the same subject under different lighting conditions and at different times of day, highlighted Monet's fascination with the way the world seemed to change before his eyes. His approach to repetition and variation laid the groundwork for much of the abstract experimentation that would follow in the 20th century. The birth of the Impressionist movement in the 1870s marked a seismic shift in the world of art. Although Monet had already begun to experiment with new techniques in his earlier works, it was during this period that his artistic vision would come to fruition in a way that would forever change the course of art history. At the heart of the movement was a shared commitment to breaking away from the rigid formalism of academic painting. This rebellion against the established norms would not only redefine the way landscapes and everyday scenes were depicted, but would also fundamentally alter the role of the artist in society. Impressionism was not just an aesthetic shift, but a revolutionary way of thinking about the act of painting itself. The movement's founders, including Monet, Renoir, Degas, Pissarro, and others, were united by a desire to move beyond the static, polished images of the academic tradition. For these artists, the key to capturing the world was to embrace the fleeting moment, to render not just the physical appearance of a scene, but the very atmosphere in which it existed. This desire to express the immediacy of the visual world led them to experiment with a new approach to light, color, and brushwork. Monet's painting impression, Sunrise, 1872, which was exhibited in the first Impressionist exhibition in 1874, is widely considered to be the catalyst for the movement's name. The work depicted the port of Le Havre at dawn, with its soft light filtering through a morning mist. The brushstrokes were loose, quick, and seemingly unfinished, a stark contrast to the precise, detailed work typical of the time. The painting's title, Impression Sunrise, was coined by a critic as a critique of its unfinished quality, but Monet, rather than being offended, embraced the term. The name Impressionism stuck, and with it came a new way of thinking about the purpose and practice of painting. This new approach emphasized the importance of capturing the impression of a moment rather than attempting to create a detailed, lifelike image. Monet's use of quick, short brushstrokes was designed to capture the essence of the scene rather than its minutiae. Light, which had always been an important element in art, became the central focus of Monet's work. He sought to capture its fleeting effects on the landscape, the way sunlight could change the color of a surface depending on the time of day, the weather, and the season. Monet's preoccupation with light is particularly evident in his Water Lily series and his other later works, where he depicted nature in ways that seemed to dissolve the boundaries between form and light. The Impressionists were also interested in painting in plein air, outdoors in the open air, rather than in the controlled environment of the studio. This method allowed them to directly observe nature, and it also brought with it an important realization. Nature itself was constantly changing. The shifting light, the movement of clouds, the varying reflections on water, all of these were impermanent and could only be captured at a specific moment in time. Monet's haystack series, for example, captured the same stacks of hay under different lighting conditions and at various times of day, revealing how light altered the very nature of the landscape. The Impressionist dedication to painting from life, in direct confrontation with nature, was revolutionary because it rejected the tradition of painting idealized or timeless scenes. Monet's commitment to capturing transient moments also extended to his choice of subjects. Rather than focusing on historical events or mythological themes, which were favored by academic artists, Monet and his colleagues turned their attention to the everyday scenes of modern life. Gardens, streets, rivers, and the countryside. This shift in subject matter was a reflection of the broader changes occurring in French society at the time. The Industrial Revolution, the rise of urbanization, and the expansion of railways and public parks were transforming the landscape. Monet's Boulevard Montmartre, 1878, painted the busy, vibrant Parisian street scene, not as a snapshot of a single moment, but as a dynamic, shifting environment. The first Impressionist exhibition in 1874 was a turning point for Monet and his fellow artists. The Salon, the official exhibition of the French Academy, had rejected many of their works, deeming them too radical and unfinished. In response, the group organized their own show, independent of the Salon, at a former photography studio. The exhibition, though met with ridicule from many critics, proved to be a significant milestone in the development of the movement. The public's reaction was mixed, with some patrons confused by the loose brushstrokes and unconventional compositions, while others, including some forward-thinking collectors, began to see the potential in this new approach to painting. In the years that followed, Monet's work became increasingly more experimental. In the late 1870s, he began working on a series of paintings that would come to define his legacy, his Water Lily series. Monet's garden in Giverny, which he designed himself, became the focal point of these works. The water lilies, with their delicate forms and shimmering reflections, were an ideal subject for Monet's exploration of light and color. But beyond that, they represented Monet's desire to paint the essence of nature, not its physical details. The reflections of the lilies on the water, the interplay of colors, and the subtle changes in the water's surface captured Monet's increasingly abstract approach to the world around him. As Monet's focus on capturing the essence of a moment deepened, his works became even less concerned with the objective reality of the scene and more focused on the subjective experience of the viewer. This was especially evident in his later works, such as his depictions of Rouen Cathedral and the Houses of Parliament in London. In these series, Monet painted the same subject multiple times, each time under different lighting conditions and at various times of day, showing how light could completely transform a scene. By this point, Monet was less interested in painting a literal representation of the cathedral or the Parliament building. Instead, he sought to convey the way the atmosphere, light, and time of day could alter the viewer's perception of the subject. Throughout the 1880s and 1890s, Monet's work became more widely recognized and respected, though he remained a figure of controversy. While some critics continued to deride his works as unfinished or overly simplistic, others began to see the depth and innovation in his approach. Monet's insistence on capturing light and atmosphere instead of form and detail was gaining broader acceptance, and his work began to influence artists both in France and abroad. Monet's contemporaries, including Edgar Degas, Camille Pissarro, and Pierre-Auguste Renoir, continued to push the boundaries of what painting could achieve, but it was Monet who, through his focus on light and the ephemeral nature of the world, truly embodied the core values of the Impressionist movement. The birth of Impressionism marked a profound transformation in the art world. What had started as a rejection of academic traditions evolved into a revolutionary movement that changed the way artists and viewers approached the act of painting. Monet's unwavering commitment to capturing the transient effects of light, the fleeting beauty of nature, and the impermanence of the world around him has ensured his place in art history. The 1870s were a decade of intense personal and financial hardship for Claude Monet, a period that tested his resilience both as an artist and as an individual. Though Monet had found his artistic voice and begun to push the boundaries of painting, the path to success was far from smooth. The decade was marked by the constant tension between his creative ambitions and the practical struggles of life. Throughout these years, Monet faced personal tragedies, financial instability, and the turbulent political climate of France, all of which would shape his work and deepen his commitment to capturing the beauty of the fleeting moment. One of the greatest challenges Monet faced during the 1870s was the death of his beloved mother, Louise Monet, in 1867. Her passing left a deep emotional void in Monet's life, and he often struggled with feelings of grief and loss. His mother had been a source of comfort and support during his early years as an artist, and her death marked the end of an important chapter in his life. In the wake of her passing, Monet turned to his art as a means of expressing his sorrow, but it was a painful and difficult process. His works during this period, such as Woman in the Green Dress, 1866, were imbued with a somber, introspective quality. While Monet's relationship with his mother was crucial to his emotional development, it was the loss of her that spurred him to dive deeper into his artistic exploration. In addition to personal grief, Monet also found himself struggling financially throughout much of the 1870s. Despite his involvement in the first Impressionist exhibitions and the growing recognition of his talents, he was not immune to the harsh economic realities of being a working artist. The costs of producing a body of work, coupled with his inability to sell many of his paintings, left him in a precarious financial position. Monet's family, including his wife Camille and their young child, had to endure years of uncertainty as they faced the constant threat of poverty. Monet's struggles were compounded by the fact that, despite his talents, the art world was slow to embrace his revolutionary approach to painting. One of the most difficult periods of Monet's life during the 1870s came with the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 to 1871. The war, which resulted in the defeat of France and the subsequent establishment of the German Empire, created a profound sense of instability in the country. Monet was living in Paris at the time, and the conflict threw his life into chaos. Monet's first wife, Camille, was severely affected by the war, and the family was forced to move several times in an effort to find safety. During this period, Monet's focus on art became a way of coping with the fear and uncertainty that defined the war years. His works from this period, though still characterized by his dedication to capturing light and atmosphere, were darker in tone, reflecting the personal and societal upheaval of time. Despite the external chaos, Monet's artistic output during the 1870s began to evolve in response to his emotional and financial struggles. One of his most significant achievements of this decade was the creation of the Argenteuil series, a set of paintings that depict the suburb of Argenteuil on the Seine River, where Monet moved with his family in 1871. The town, with its open fields, calm waters, and nearby railway lines, became a central theme in Monet's work. The Argenteuil paintings marked a turning point for Monet, as he began to explore the effects of industrialization on the natural world. In these works, Monet juxtaposed the serenity of nature with the emerging influence of modernity, symbolized by the railroad tracks and steamships that appear in the background. Monet's time in Argenteuil was also significant for his personal life. It was here that he began to build his family with Camille, his partner and muse. Camille Monet became an important figure in his life and work, appearing in many of Monet's paintings, including The Woman with a Parasol, 1873, which depicts her standing in a field, gazing toward the viewer. This painting, with its bright colors and sense of movement, reflects the optimism and vitality that Monet found in his relationship with Camille. However, the joy that Monet experienced during this period was tempered by the financial strain that continued to haunt him. Despite Camille's beauty and their deep connection, the pressure of making a living as an artist weighed heavily on Monet. In 1874, Monet's situation took a further blow when his beloved wife Camille fell seriously ill. Her health had been in decline for some time, and Monet, devastated by her condition, found himself torn between his responsibilities as a husband and father and his desire to devote himself to his art. Despite the growing tensions in his personal life, Monet continued to paint, using his art as a way to cope with his wife's illness. During this difficult period, Monet's works took on a more emotional and introspective quality. The Water Lilies series, which would later become some of his most famous works, had its beginnings in these years. Monet's garden in Giverny, which he began to cultivate in the mid-1870s, provided him with an oasis of beauty in the midst of his personal turmoil. This garden would become his lifelong source of inspiration, reflecting both his artistic and emotional journey. The death of Camille in 1879 was a crushing blow for Monet. Her passing, after a long battle with tuberculosis, left Monet devastated. Her death not only affected his personal life, but also had a profound impact on his art. In the aftermath of her loss, Monet's paintings became even more focused on the theme of transience, on the fleeting nature of life and the ephemeral quality of beauty. Monet's emotional pain and his overwhelming sense of loss were channeled into his work, which increasingly sought to capture the fleeting effects of light, color, and atmosphere. Monet's focus on nature and its impermanence became a form of solace, a way for him to process his grief. Despite the personal tragedies and financial hardships he faced in the 1870s, Monet's work began to gain recognition among a select group of collectors and art lovers. Though the art world was slow to accept the radical nature of Impressionism, Monet's persistence paid off. In 1876, he had a breakthrough when he managed to sell several paintings, including some of his Argenteuil works, and by the end of the decade, his works were being displayed in a number of private galleries and exhibitions. The Impressionists' unconventional approach to painting, while still met with resistance, began to attract a growing following, and Monet's contributions to this movement were becoming more widely recognized. The 1870s, therefore, were a decade of profound struggle for Claude Monet. Yet, despite the personal losses, financial hardships, and societal upheaval, Monet's resolve to pursue his artistic vision never wavered. His ability to find meaning in the ever-changing light of nature, to capture the ephemeral beauty of a world, became his greatest triumph in the face of adversity. In the late 1880s, Claude Monet's life took a turn toward relative stability and artistic fulfillment when he moved to the small village of Giverny, located in the Normandy region of France. Giverny would become the artist's home for the last 4 decades of his life and the place where he created some of his most iconic works, including the Water Lily series. This period in Monet's life, marked by personal renewal and increased recognition, was also characterized by his artistic experimentation at an unprecedented level. Monet's time in Giverny represents a key chapter in his legacy, as he found solace in nature and the creative freedom to fully embrace his evolving vision. Monet's decision to move to Giverny in 1883 was influenced by a combination of practical and personal factors. After years of struggling with financial difficulties and personal losses, Monet found the idyllic village to be a peaceful retreat where he could focus on his work. Giverny offered the quiet of the countryside, as well as an inspiring natural landscape that would become an essential part of his art. The village, situated near the Seine River, surrounded by fields, gardens, and trees, was a perfect setting for an artist so deeply attuned to the rhythms of nature. Upon settling in Giverny, Monet purchased a modest house and set about transforming the surrounding land into an extraordinary garden. This garden, which Monet personally designed and cultivated, would become a central motif in his work for the remainder of his life. He created a landscape that was not just an extension of his home, but a living canvas that he could observe, paint, and reimagine. The garden was divided into 2 main sections: the flower garden in front of the house and the water garden, which featured a pond with water lilies, weeping willows, and a Japanese-style bridge. Monet's obsession with light and reflection found its perfect expression in the water garden. The pond, with its still surface, acted as a mirror, reflecting the changing colors of the sky and surrounding flora. Monet spent hours in the garden, observing the interplay of light on the water and the shifting reflections of the plants and trees. The water lilies that grew in the pond became one of Monet's primary subjects, and he returned to them time and again, capturing their beauty under different conditions and at various times of the day. The reflections in the pond were not just representations of nature. They were transformed into abstract patterns of color, light, and texture. During this period, Monet's artistic style began to shift even further toward abstraction. His earlier works, although revolutionary, still adhered to certain forms of representation. In Giverny, however, Monet increasingly moved away from the conventions of traditional landscape painting, focusing more on the sensory experience of the scene than on literal accuracy. His Water Lilies series, which he began painting in the late 1890s, exemplifies this evolution. These paintings, with their shimmering surfaces and diffused colors, appear almost to dissolve into pure abstraction. In these works, the boundaries between the water's surface, the lilies, and the surrounding light become increasingly indistinct, pushing the viewer to experience the painting on a purely visual and emotional level. One of the defining features of Monet's work in Giverny was his growing focus on the effects of light and weather. While his earlier works had explored how light could change the appearance of a scene, in Giverny, Monet seemed to embrace the constantly shifting nature of light in a more profound way. The seasons, the time of day, and even the weather conditions all became important factors in his work. He would often paint the same scene multiple times under different conditions, capturing the way the light altered the colors and textures of the landscape. Monet's ability to capture these subtle changes is perhaps best seen in his series paintings, such as those of the Rouen Cathedral and Haystacks. But it was in Giverny that he fully embraced the idea of series as a means of exploring the transient effects of light. The gardens of Giverny were not only a source of inspiration for Monet's paintings, but also a source of personal solace. Following years of personal hardships, including the death of his wife Camille and the financial struggles of the 1870s, Giverny provided Monet with a sense of peace and stability. His garden allowed him to reconnect with nature on a deeply personal level. Monet's relationship with the natural world became one of mutual respect and understanding. It was as if the garden, with its colors and textures, spoke to Monet in a language he had learned to understand intimately. The act of gardening became a form of therapy for Monet, and in return, the garden became his artistic muse. Monet's life in Giverny also saw a shift in his relationships with other artists. The Impressionist group, which had struggled for recognition in the 1870s and 1880s, had begun to gain more acceptance by the late 1890s. Monet, now one of the most prominent figures in the movement, had gained a certain level of commercial success, though he remained somewhat reclusive. His personal connections with artists such as Renoir, Pissarro, and Sisley were strong, but Monet increasingly worked in solitude, drawn to the privacy of his home and garden. Monet's isolation in Giverny allowed him the space to experiment without the distractions of the bustling Parisian art world. The quietude of Giverny, with its peaceful rhythms, offered Monet the mental clarity necessary to pursue his evolving vision. By the turn of the century, Monet's fame had grown considerably, and his work had begun to be exhibited in major galleries in Paris and beyond. Despite the recognition, Monet remained committed to his own artistic vision, working tirelessly on his series of water lilies. These paintings, which would come to define Monet's late career, were a manifestation of his growing desire to explore the boundaries of representation. As his vision shifted toward abstraction, Monet became less concerned with realistic depiction and more interested in capturing the emotional essence of a moment. he began to create large-scale works, some of which would eventually be displayed in the large-scale rooms of the Musée d'Orangerie in Paris, where they could be viewed in their full immersive effect. The tranquility of Giverny was not without its challenges. However, Monet's health began to deteriorate in the early 1900s, and he suffered from cataracts, which affected his ability to see clearly. This had a profound impact on his later works, as Monet's vision became increasingly clouded, both literally and metaphorically. Some art historians believe that Monet's later water lilies paintings were influenced by his deteriorating eyesight, as the forms in these works become more abstract and the color palette becomes bolder and more intense. These works, though difficult to interpret, represent Monet's ability to transcend the limitations of his physical body in pursuit of his artistic ideals. Monet's later years in Giverny were marked by a profound sense of artistic accomplishment, even as he struggled with the realities of aging and failing health. Despite his challenges, Monet continued to paint with the same dedication and passion that had defined his early career. He remained a vital force in the world of art, inspiring a new generation of painters who were drawn to his exploration of color, light, and form. Monet's time in Giverny, where he created his most celebrated works, would come to be seen as the pinnacle of his artistic journey. Claude Monet's artistic journey was defined not only by the subjects he chose, but by his ever-evolving technique. From his early experiments with light and shadow to his later explorations of abstraction, Monet's approach to painting was revolutionary in its relentless pursuit of capturing the ever-changing qualities of light, color, and atmosphere. His technique, which developed over the decades, was in many ways a radical departure from the norms of academic painting, and it laid the foundation for modern art. By embracing the use of color, light, and texture as expressive tools rather than as mere means of representation, Monet changed the way the world saw art and nature itself. In Monet's early career, his technique was marked by a keen attention to detail, though even at this stage, he was inclined to use color in innovative ways. His early works, such as The Woman in the Green Dress, 1866, showcased his ability to capture the essence of light and texture through quick brushstrokes, though still within a fairly conventional framework. However, Monet was never content to simply follow tradition. As he began to study the work of other artists and reflect on his experiences in nature, he began to focus more intently on the interplay between light and color. This shift in his approach was a gradual process, marked by his increasing departure from the stiff academic tradition that had previously defined his work. By the time Monet became involved with the Impressionist movement in the 1870s, his technique had already begun to evolve significantly. His characteristic loose brushstrokes were a clear break from the meticulous, controlled techniques of the academic artists. Monet abandoned the traditional method of painting under artificial light in the studio, preferring instead to work outdoors, directly observing nature. This approach, known as plein air painting, allowed Monet to observe the nuances of light in the open air, from the shifting colors of sunrise to the changing hue of a tree as it passed in and out of shadow. His brushstrokes became shorter and more direct, allowing him to capture the fleeting qualities of light and the atmosphere of the moment. A defining feature of Monet's technique during the 1870s was his use of color as a way to express the transient nature of the world around him. Rather than relying on the traditional practice of creating depth and form through chiaroscuro, the contrast of light and dark, Monet used color itself to build structure and to evoke a sense of movement. He often painted without using black paint, preferring instead to mix complementary colors to create shadows. This technique allowed for a more vibrant and dynamic rendering of light and atmosphere. For example, in Impression Sunrise, 1872, the iconic painting that would give the movement its name, Monet used a mix of blues, oranges, and reds to depict the morning fog and the reflection of the sun on the water. The result is a glowing, ephemeral scene that captures the fleeting moment of dawn. In the 1880s, Monet's technique evolved even further as he began to focus on the effects of light at different times of day and in different weather conditions. This interest led him to paint the same subject multiple times under varying circumstances, exploring the nuances of color and light in these different settings. The Haystack series, 1890 to 1891, for instance, consists of more than 30 paintings of the same subject. The haystacks in the fields of Giverny, but each work captures a different time of day, season, or weather condition. In these paintings, Monet's use of color and light was pushed to its limits. He no longer focused on creating an accurate, detailed representation of the haystacks, but rather on conveying the sensation of the moment. The changes in light caused the landscape to shift dramatically, and Monet used color to express these variations. A haystack bathed in the golden light of a late summer afternoon appeared vastly different from the same haystack in the cool, blue light of early morning or under the soft glow of winter sunlight. Monet's approach to color was a key aspect of his distinctive technique, and it became even more prominent in his later works. By the 1890s and early 1900s, as Monet's vision became more focused on abstraction, he began to explore color in ways that had never been seen before. His Water Lily series is a prime example of this evolution. In these works, the colors appear to float and intermingle, dissolving into one another and creating an almost dreamlike effect. Monet used a rich palette of colors, pinks, purples, blues, and greens, to depict the surface of the water, the lilies, and the surrounding reflections. The forms in these paintings were no longer solid or defined. Instead, they blended into the atmosphere, creating a harmonious and fluid composition. The result was a deeply immersive experience, inviting the viewer to lose themselves in the interplay of light and color, much like Monet had while painting. The texture of Monet's paintings also became a more prominent feature of his work in his later years. His brushstrokes, which had always been loose and fluid, became even more pronounced. In his Water Lily series, the paint is often applied thickly, creating a textured surface that gives the work a sense of depth and dimension. This technique allowed Monet to capture not just the appearance of nature, but the very sensation of being surrounded by it. The texture of the paint itself became part of the visual experience, adding to the impression of movement and light. In these later works, Monet's technique was less concerned with literal representation and more focused on creating a visceral, emotional connection between the viewer and the scene. Monet's use of brushwork also evolved throughout his career. In his early works, his brushstrokes were relatively controlled, though still dynamic, reflecting his interest in light and movement. As he progressed, Monet became more experimental, and his brushstrokes grew more expressive. In his later years, particularly in his depictions of the water lilies, his brushwork became freer, almost abstract. Rather than depicting objects in sharp detail, Monet used the brushstrokes to evoke the sensation of light, water, and movement. These looser, more fluid strokes contributed to the sense of immediacy in his work, as if the viewer was witnessing a fleeting moment in time. Monet's later works also reveal a growing interest in the psychological and emotional effects of color. While earlier works focused on capturing the external world, Monet's later paintings began to delve into the emotional resonance of color and light. The water lilies paintings, in particular, were imbued with a sense of quiet contemplation. The large-scale, immersive works allowed Monet to explore his inner world and his sense of connection to nature. His use of color was not just an attempt to replicate the world, but to convey the emotions that nature evoked in him. The soft blending of colors in the Water Lilies series creates a sense of calm and introspection, inviting the viewer to experience nature not just as a physical place, but as an emotional and spiritual space. Throughout his career, Monet's technical innovations were integral to his artistic vision. His embrace of color, light, and texture as tools for emotional expression transformed the way art was perceived. Monet did not simply recreate nature. He interpreted it, revealing its transient beauty and its deeper emotional significance. His technique, while grounded in the observation of the natural world, transcended the confines of traditional representation. By the time Monet entered the final stages of his career, he had transformed the very language of painting, making color and light not just components of visual representation, but the primary means of communicating feeling and experience. Claude Monet's influence on the art world is immeasurable, not only because of his revolutionary techniques, but also because of his profound impact on the trajectory of modern art. While Monet's work was not always immediately appreciated in his lifetime, by the early 20th century, his unique style and the innovations he brought to painting had paved the way for new artistic movements and a redefinition of how we view the relationship between nature, light, and color. The reverberations of his artistic legacy were felt both within his lifetime and in the many decades that followed. Monet's approach to painting catalyzed a series of artistic revolutions, influencing countless artists across the globe, and continues to resonate within the fabric of contemporary art today. Monet's legacy is often closely associated with the Impressionist movement, a group of artists who rejected the strict conventions of academic art. The hallmark of Impressionism was its emphasis on capturing fleeting moments, the ephemeral qualities of light, and the shifting atmosphere of a scene rather than adhering to precise details and formal compositions. Monet, as one of the movement's leading figures, was instrumental in shaping this aesthetic. His early works, such as Impression, Sunrise, 1872, for which the movement was named, were groundbreaking for their loose brushwork, vibrant use of color, and focus on light rather than form. These qualities pushed against the norms of traditional art and redefined what painting could be. Over time, Monet's insistence on painting from life, observing nature directly and with immediacy, inspired future generations of artists to do the same. The profound effect of Monet's work was not limited to the Impressionists alone. His explorations of color and light resonated with artists across various movements that followed. In particular, the development of post-impressionism, fauvism, and even abstract expressionism owed much to Monet's innovations. Post-impressionists like Vincent van Gogh, Paul Cézanne, and Georges Seurat, while each developing their own distinct approaches to color and form, were heavily influenced by Monet's ability to capture the transient beauty of nature and the psychological impact of color. Van Gogh, for example, was inspired by Monet's use of bold colors and expressive brushstrokes. His Sunflowers and Starry Night reflect a similar engagement with color as a means of emotional expression, though with more intense, sometimes turbulent, brushwork. In the early 20th century, Monet's work also profoundly impacted the development of abstract art. As artists like Vasily Kandinsky and Kazimir Malevich began to move away from representation entirely, they found inspiration in Monet's later works, especially his Water Lily series. These paintings, with their almost mystical qualities, where the forms of nature dissolve into swirls of color and texture, anticipated the move toward abstraction in art. By the time the abstract expressionists emerged in the 1940s and 1950s, Monet's emphasis on color, texture, and mood had already established a framework for artists who sought to express not the literal world, but an inner, emotional reality. The gestural brushstrokes, fluid compositions, and bold use of color seen in the works of Jackson Pollock, Mark Rothko, and Helen Frankenthaler reflect an ongoing dialogue with Monet's approach to abstraction and color. Monet's legacy is also seen in the way his work has influenced the way we think about the relationship between art and the natural world. His approach to painting, one that focused on capturing the shifting qualities of light, the impermanence of nature, and the intimate connection between the artist and their subject, has shaped our modern understanding of environmentalism in art. Many contemporary artists, particularly those involved in eco-art and landscape art, draw inspiration from Monet's depiction of nature as something fluid and ever-changing. Artists such as Andy Goldsworthy, whose work involves using natural materials and working within the landscape, embody Monet's reverence for the natural world and the ephemeral qualities of nature that he so often sought to capture. Equally important in Monet's legacy is the continued relevance of his work in the realm of art history. His paintings have become canonical in the study of art, with his techniques and innovations serving as a key reference point for artists, curators, and historians. Major art institutions around the world, including the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, and the National Gallery in London, feature Monet's works as a cornerstone of their collections. His Water Lily series, now housed in the Musée de l'Orangerie in Paris, has become one of the most visited and celebrated art collections globally. These immersive works, which invite the viewer into a world of light and reflection, continue to awe audiences and inspire deep reflection on the relationship between art, nature, and perception. In addition to his influence on visual artists, Monet's legacy also extends into other fields of creative expression. Writers and poets have often turned to Monet's works for inspiration, finding in them a reflection of the passage of time and the beauty of the natural world. The American poet Wallace Stevens, for example, used Monet's water lilies as an emblem of the spiritual connection between nature and human experience in his poetry. The focus on perception and the transient nature of existence found in Monet's work is echoed in the meditative tone of much modern poetry. His art, with its sense of momentary suspension, continues to influence how we think about time, perception, and the environment in literature. Monet's works have also inspired a growing number of art collectors, museums, and exhibitions dedicated to showcasing his influence. With their focus on the vivid beauty of color, the dynamism of light, and the intimacy of nature, Monet's paintings continue to be some of the most valuable and sought-after works in the art market. The high profile of his exhibitions and retrospectives at major institutions underscores his continuing relevance in the art world. From the 1960s onwards, his work has seen a resurgence in global exhibitions, cementing his status as a foundational figure in the history of art. His paintings, widely reproduced and celebrated, have become not only icons of Impressionism, but touchstones in the broader narrative of the evolution of modern art. Moreover, Monet's impact is not confined solely to the Western tradition of painting. As artists around the world began to move away from traditional forms of representation in the 20th century, Monet's approach to capturing light and emotion was embraced globally. In Japan, for example, Monet's use of color and light resonated deeply with the traditional ink and watercolor techniques of Japanese art. His Water Lily series, with its flowing organic compositions, is often compared to the naturalism seen in Japanese landscape paintings. Monet himself was heavily influenced by Japanese prints, which he collected avidly, and this influence is evident in the delicate rendering of natural subjects and the emphasis on the interplay between water and light in his later works. Finally, the continued appreciation of Monet's work reveals how his artistic vision transcended time and place. In today's world, where rapid technological advancements and new media have reshaped the art scene, Monet's focus on light, color, and nature remains a relevant and poignant counterpoint to the digital age. In an era where images are often reproduced and disseminated in ways that can feel detached from the physical world, Monet's work reminds us of the importance of direct observation and the profound emotional connections that can arise from our engagement with a natural environment. As much as Monet's art was revolutionary in his time, it remains a beacon for artists and art lovers today, urging us to slow down and observe the world around us with an intensity and appreciation that Monet himself embodied. The final years of Claude Monet's life were marked by both personal hardship and artistic triumph. As he grew older, Monet's life became increasingly complex, intertwined with physical ailments, family loss, and a relentless pursuit of artistic innovation. Despite the challenges he faced in his later years, these were also the years in which he produced some of his most beloved and groundbreaking works. His Water Lily series, for example, would become the defining legacy of his final phase, a masterful exploration of light, color, and abstraction that forever transformed the landscape of modern art. Monet's later years were not just a continuation of his earlier work, but also a period of intense personal reflection and a deepening exploration of his relationship with nature. Monet's health began to decline as he entered his 60s and 70s. By the early 1910s, he was suffering from cataracts, which severely affected his vision. The disease blurred his ability to see clearly, and colors appeared distorted. This condition, which would continue to worsen over the years, forced Monet to adapt his artistic approach. Rather than abandoning painting, he adjusted his technique to accommodate his changing perception of color and light. The blue and green hues he had once employed so masterfully became increasingly difficult for him to distinguish. However, this new challenge did not stifle his creative drive. On the contrary, it seemed to fuel his determination to continue experimenting with color in new ways. Despite his deteriorating eyesight, Monet's productivity during this period was remarkable. The artist, who had once painted in plein air, moved increasingly toward a more studio-based approach. Yet, even as he became more isolated in his work, his creative energy seemed to grow. In 1900, Monet began work on a new series, the Water Lilies series, a set of large-scale paintings that would span the next 2 decades. The series, which was to become one of the most iconic in the history of art, would eventually encompass over 250 paintings. In these works, Monet focused exclusively on the water lilies in his garden at Giverny, often depicting them in close-up or in expansive views of the water, where the plants seemed to dissolve into the reflections of the sky and trees. The Water Lily series represents more than just a continuation of Monet's fascination with light and color. They mark a radical shift toward abstraction in art. As Monet's eyesight deteriorated, he found himself increasingly liberated from the need for clear, distinct representations of objects. His brushstrokes became looser and more expressive, and his compositions increasingly abstract. In these later paintings, the forms of the lilies and their reflections often blur into one another, creating a floating, dreamlike quality. The boundaries between the water, the sky, and the foliage are often indistinct, allowing the viewer's imagination to complete the scene. This dissolution of form was revolutionary and set the stage for the development of abstract art in the 20th century. Monet's obsession with capturing the nuances of light and atmosphere reached new heights in the Water Lilies paintings. The works convey a sense of immersion in nature, drawing the viewer into a world where the distinctions between water, plants, and sky are indistinguishable. The paintings emphasize the interplay of light and color rather than the solid shapes of the objects being depicted. The reflective surfaces of the water, combined with the soft blending of colors, create a sense of fluidity and motion that mirrors the artist's own internal shifts. Monet's late works seem less concerned with representing reality and more focused on evoking an emotional and sensory experience of the natural world. At the same time, Monet's personal life was fraught with sadness and loss. In 1911, his beloved wife, Camille Monet, had passed away from cancer, a tragedy that deeply affected him. In his grief, Monet found solace in his garden, a sanctuary that had become the setting for many of his most beloved paintings. His obsession with the water lilies in particular became a way for him to process his grief, allowing him to pour his emotions into the work. Monet's garden in Giverny, which he had meticulously cultivated over many years, became a place of meditation and renewal for the artist. As he watched the seasons change and the lilies bloom, he found a kind of healing, using his art to reconnect with the beauty and cycles of nature. During the years following Camille's death, Monet's financial situation fluctuated, but he remained committed to his work. His fame, which had grown steadily throughout his career, reached new heights as his paintings began to attract widespread acclaim. Despite his struggles with health and personal loss, Monet continued to push the boundaries of his art, creating increasingly innovative works that defied conventional artistic standards. His decision to focus almost exclusively on his water garden was, in part, a response to the need for creative expression in the face of personal challenges. As the world plunged into World War I, Monet's world in Giverny seemed almost untouched by the chaos around him. His isolation in the countryside allowed him to continue his work, even as the war disrupted much of France. During this time, Monet became increasingly reclusive, preferring to remain in his garden rather than engaging with the outside world. In these years, Monet's work began to take on a meditative quality. The chaotic violence of the war contrasted sharply with the tranquility of his paintings, which were focused on stillness and the passage of time. In a world in turmoil, Monet's art became a sanctuary, a place where the observer could lose themselves in the gentle rhythms of nature. Monet's later years were also marked by an increasing focus on the scale and scope of his paintings. The water lilies were often produced in large formats, some reaching over 6 feet in width. These monumental canvases were intended to be viewed in immersive settings, and they were ultimately installed in 2 rooms of the Musée de l'Orangerie in Paris, where they are still on display today. The scale of these works was a deliberate choice on Monet's part, aimed at enveloping the viewer in an all-encompassing environment. The works were no longer just windows into nature. They were portals into the experience of nature itself. This ambition to create an immersive environment was a bold statement of Monet's belief in the power of art to transcend the confines of the canvas and to offer a direct, unmediated experience of the world. In 1923, Monet's eyesight deteriorated further, and he underwent cataract surgery. The effects of the surgery were not immediate, and while his vision was somewhat restored, it remained compromised. Nonetheless, Monet's passion for painting never waned. Despite his health struggles, he continued to work on his water lilies and other subjects, even as his vision increasingly failed him. The fact that he continued to paint with such fervor, despite the challenges he faced, speaks to the depth of his commitment to his art. For Monet, painting was not just a profession, it was a way of life, a way of engaging with the world and processing his emotions. His ability to adapt to the changes in his vision and his relentless pursuit of artistic expression in the face of adversity is a testament to his resilience and dedication. Monet died on December 5, 1926, at the age of 86, leaving behind a monumental body of work that would continue to inspire artists for generations to come. His final years were marked by the creation of some of the most extraordinary works in the history of art, works that would redefine the boundaries of what painting could achieve. His later years were a time of introspection, loss, and personal renewal, as Monet turned inward to explore his relationship with nature, light, and color. His Water Lilies series, created in these final years, remains a symbol of his artistic genius and his ability to transform personal struggle into universal beauty. Through his relentless innovation and unyielding dedication, Monet not only left behind a legacy of artistic mastery, but also a lasting vision of the world that continues to resonate with viewers to this day. By the time of Claude Monet's death in 1926, the world of art had already begun to shift dramatically. His innovative techniques and his radical break from the traditions of the academic art world had set the stage for an explosion of new artistic movements. While the direct influence of Monet's work was most evident in the Impressionist and Post-Impressionist movements, the full breadth of his impact would only become fully apparent in the decades following his death. Monet's exploration of color, light, and abstraction reshaped how artists approach their work, influencing not just those who followed in his footsteps, but the entire trajectory of modern and contemporary art. In the early 20th century, Monet's paintings began to be recognized as not merely a part of the Impressionist movement, but as a pivotal contribution to the very evolution of modern art. His rejection of the academic insistence on representational accuracy and his focus on capturing fleeting moments in nature opened the door for subsequent generations of artists to explore new methods of expression. Artists like Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque, who would later become pioneers of Cubism, were influenced by Monet's fragmented representations of nature. His emphasis on perception, how light, atmosphere, and the play of colors could alter the way we see the world, will become a key philosophical foundation for much of the abstract and non-representational art that would dominate the 20th century. Monet's insistence on color as a primary element of expression also foreshadowed the development of color theory and the use of color to convey emotion and mood, which became central to the Fauvist movement. The Fauve, led by artists like Henri Matisse and André Derain, took Monet's bold use of color to an even more extreme place. While Monet had softened the boundaries of color in his later works, the Fauve pushed them to an entirely new level of intensity, using colors to evoke strong emotional responses rather than merely to replicate nature. Matisse, in particular, was deeply influenced by Monet's Water Lily series, appreciating the way that Monet's color palette worked to capture mood rather than mere representation. In the mid-20th century, Monet's work also had a profound impact on abstract expressionism. This movement, which emphasized spontaneity, emotion, and the artist's personal experience of the world, drew directly from Monet's exploration of light, form, and texture. Artists like Jackson Pollock, Mark Rothko, and Willem de Kooning found inspiration in Monet's ability to dissolve form into color and light. The blurred edges and fluidity of Monet's late work anticipated the gestural, expressive brushstrokes that would characterize much of abstract expressionism. The idea that a painting could be less about the physical world and more about conveying an emotional or psychological state was a concept that Monet had already explored in his Water Lilies, making him a precursor to many of the avant-garde movements that followed. Monet's influence was not confined to European and American artists alone. His works also found resonance with artists in other parts of the world, especially in Japan. Monet's obsession with capturing nature and its transient qualities aligned with many of the themes in traditional Japanese art, particularly in its emphasis on the fleeting beauty of nature and the impermanence of life. Monet's own interest in Japanese woodblock prints, which he collected throughout his life, also mirrored the aesthetic and philosophical values found in Japanese art. His work in his garden, particularly the Water Lily series, was seen by some critics as a manifestation of a uniquely Western interpretation of Japanese principles. This cross-cultural exchange between Monet's work and Eastern art added a new layer of depth to his influence, expanding his legacy beyond the confines of Western art traditions. As time went on, Monet's influence continued to shape the development of art theory and criticism. His focus on perception and the way in which he depicted not just the subject, but the viewer's experience of the subject challenged traditional notions of representation. Art critics, such as Robert Hughes and John Berger, would later reflect on Monet's legacy as a watershed moment in art history, arguing that Monet's shift away from precise realism helped open the door for art to be understood as an emotional, subjective, and philosophical pursuit rather than just a mimetic reflection of the external world. Monet's approach encouraged future artists to explore their inner worlds and express their emotions through the act of painting itself, not just through the depiction of recognizable forms. In the realm of architecture, Monet's impact was also profound, especially in the design of exhibition spaces. The large-scale Water Lilies paintings, with their immersive quality, inspired the creation of gallery environments where the artwork could engage viewers in a more intimate and enveloping way. The Musée de l'Orangerie in Paris, which houses a permanent collection of Monet's water lilies, is one of the most striking examples of this type of architectural thinking. The circular rooms designed to display the paintings were carefully crafted to allow the viewer to experience Monet's work as if they were surrounded by the world he depicted. This concept of creating an all-encompassing environment for art has since influenced the design of modern museums, from New York's Guggenheim Museum to the Tate Modern in London, where the viewer's experience of the space is as much a part of the artwork as the paintings themselves. Monet's influence also had an indirect impact on the development of photography. While the medium of photography was still in its infancy during Monet's lifetime, his work provided a model for how artists could explore perception and light in ways that transcended mere documentation. The blurry, atmospheric qualities of Monet's paintings, particularly in his depictions of water, clouds, and gardens, echoed the soft focus techniques that would later become central to certain schools of photography. Photographers like Alfred Stieglitz and Edward Weston were inspired by Monet's ability to capture the interplay of light and form in an evocative way, and his work helped to solidify the idea that photography, too, could be an art form capable of capturing the subjective experience of the world. Monet's ability to capture moments in time, particularly through the lens of light and atmosphere, also laid the groundwork for the development of time-based media art. In the digital age, contemporary artists working in video, film, and digital media have drawn inspiration from Monet's ability to create a sense of movement and change within a still image. Artists such as Bill Viola and James Torrell, who use light and video to evoke emotional and sensory experiences, are following in the footsteps of Monet's water lilies, which conveys a sense of time passing, of light shifting, and of nature's continual transformation. The celebration of Monet's work in the contemporary art world is a testament to the enduring relevance of his vision. Even as art has become more diverse and fragmented, Monet's legacy has continued to inspire a wide range of artists, from abstract painters to photographers to installation artists. His approach to capturing the intangible qualities of the world around us, its light, color, and transience, remains a powerful reminder of the endless possibilities within the realm of artistic expression. The spirit of experimentation that Monet embodied continues to challenge artists today, encouraging them to push the boundaries of what art can achieve and how it can affect the viewer. In the global art market, Monet's works remain among the most highly prized. Auctions continue to set record prices for his paintings, reflecting both the ongoing demand for his work and the enduring power of his artistic vision. Monet's paintings are not merely objects of financial value. They're symbols of an approach to art that values innovation, perception, and the human connection to nature. As long as Monet's paintings continue to be admired, discussed, and collected, his influence will endure, ensuring that his role in shaping the modern art world is forever cemented in history. Claude Monet's artistic journey was not merely the tale of one man's pursuit of beauty. It was an exploration of perception, light, and the very essence of nature itself. His work encapsulates a world constantly in flux, where the elements, water, sky, and earth, blend and shift, much like the fleeting moments he sought to capture. In understanding Monet's legacy, we must come to terms with the profound way in which he reshaped the artist's role in society and the way we engage with art today. His paintings continue to challenge our expectations of what art can be, urging us to look deeper into the world around us and find beauty in its most ephemeral moments. Monet's enduring influence lies in his ability to capture the intangible. Where earlier artists had focused on recreating the world as they saw it, Monet turned his gaze to the play of light, the movement of clouds, the shimmer on water, and the changes in the atmosphere as it shifted throughout the day. The weather, the time of year, and even the hour of the day became central to his artistic process. By concentrating on these transient elements, Monet asked his viewers to consider the passage of time itself. His work reminds us that nothing remains static. Everything is subject to change. This theme of impermanence, so prevalent in his Water Lilies series and his other late works, offers a reflection of the fragility of life and, in a broader sense, the fleeting nature of human existence. Monet's landscapes were a revolution in how nature could be depicted. Before him, landscapes often focused on vast vistas or idealized settings, where human figures and architectural elements were carefully placed to create a harmonious balance. Monet's landscapes, on the other hand, often feature few or no human figures, focusing solely on the interplay between nature and light. His scenes have no definitive boundaries, no clear horizon lines, and no rigid structure. This approach invites the viewer to become part of the scene, to immerse themselves in the experience of nature rather than simply observe it from a distance. In this way, Monet transcended traditional landscape painting by emphasizing an emotional connection to nature over intellectual interpretation. Even as his subjects became increasingly abstract and indistinct, Monet remained devoted to capturing the sensation of a place rather than its literal representation. The Water Lilies and his Haystack series, for example, focus not on the solid forms of the lilies or the bales of hay, but on how they are transformed by light. He was deeply concerned with the way in which light interacts with different surfaces and how it changes over time. This obsession with light made Monet a precursor to the abstract artists who would follow him, as he sought not only to paint objects, but to capture the very essence of their being, their interaction with light and atmosphere. Monet's legacy extends beyond just his artistic technique and subject matter. It is rooted in his philosophical approach to art. His works were not created with a desire for fame or recognition, but from an intrinsic need to express his relationship with the natural world. For Monet, painting was not an exercise in technical perfection. It was a way of seeing, of experiencing the world anew. The artist's drive was not to create finished, polished works, but to capture a moment, an instant before it slipped away. This idea of painting as an act of transience, of embracing the present moment, is something that continues to resonate with contemporary artists who are interested in process over product and experience over representation. The way Monet depicted time in his paintings also invites us to reflect on the passage of our own lives. His works capture the impermanence of nature in a way that mirrors the temporality of human existence. When we look at the changes in the landscape from one canvas to the next, whether it be the shifting light across the water or the transformation of his garden with each season, we are reminded that nothing lasts forever. Monet's art tells us that beauty exists not only in permanence, but in the fleeting moments we often overlook. In this sense, Monet's paintings hold a mirror to life itself. They encourage us to find meaning and beauty in the moments of change, in the small, ephemeral details of our everyday experience. The act of painting for Monet was an ongoing experiment. He was never content to rest on his laurels or repeat the same approach from one work to the next. Throughout his career, he continually sought new ways of interpreting the world, trying out new techniques, revising old ones, and engaging with his environment in different ways. Even as his vision faltered in his later years, he did not abandon his pursuit of innovation. Instead, he found ways to embrace his limitations, allowing them to inform and deepen his artistic exploration. This commitment to pushing forward, to continually re-envisioning his work, demonstrates Monet's profound belief in the power of art to evolve and transform both the artist and the viewer. Monet's work has also encouraged a greater appreciation for the natural world. His meticulous study of light, seasons, and weather patterns has inspired not only artists, but also environmentalists and nature lovers. In focusing so intently on his garden and the surrounding landscape, Monet elevated the ordinary to the extraordinary. He invited viewers to take a closer look at the beauty of the world around them, and in doing so, fostered a deeper connection to nature. Today, Monet's water lilies are often viewed as symbols of nature's resilience and beauty, reminding us of the importance of preserving our environment for future generations. The continued relevance of Monet's work in the 21st century speaks to his enduring legacy. His art has been celebrated in numerous exhibitions worldwide, and his paintings are some of the most widely recognized and beloved in art history. His influence can be seen in the work of countless contemporary artists who have taken his exploration of light, color, and abstraction and pushed it in new directions. Monet's impact has been far-reaching, touching not only visual artists but also musicians, writers, and filmmakers, all of whom have been inspired by his dedication to capturing the fleeting beauty of life. Monet's approach to art has also contributed to the democratization of the artistic experience. By moving away from the traditional ideals of realism and academic perfection, Monet allowed for a more inclusive understanding of what art could be. His use of color and light opened the door for the emotional resonance of art to take center stage, rather than the technical virtuosity that had once been the standard. Today, artists are free to experiment and explore new ways of communicating their inner worlds, a freedom Monet himself embraced. His work has become a touchstone for those who seek to express their unique perspectives, encouraging a more personal, emotional connection with the viewer. In the final analysis, Monet's legacy is not just that of a painter, but of a visionary who changed the way we perceive the world. His paintings invite us to see beyond the obvious, to feel the pulse of light and color, and to understand the profound beauty in the passing moments of life. Monet's art reflects the transitory nature of the world around us, urging us to pause, observe, and appreciate what is before us, because, like the light on water, it will soon be gone. His work reminds us that art, like life, is a journey, ever-changing and evolving, and it is through this continuous transformation that we find meaning and inspiration. Claude Monet's work continues to speak across generations and cultures, offering a timeless reflection of the world's fleeting beauty. As long as his paintings exist, they will serve as a reminder that art, in its highest form, is a reflection not only of the world around us, but of the very act of living itself. His legacy is one that will remain, forever capturing the light and essence of the world with every brushstroke, forever inviting us to see the beauty in the moments we often overlook.